The fluorescent lights in the grocery store flickered as I reached for the top shelf, stretching just a little too far for the organic pasta sauce. It was Tuesday, 3:47 p.m. according to the digital clock above the pharmacy counter, and I was doing what I always did on Tuesday afternoons. Shopping for dinner ingredients that would somehow transform into a meal my family might actually finish without complaints. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My fingers finally grasped the glass jar, but as I pulled it down, a sharp pain shot through my chest. Not dramatic, not movie scene intense, just enough to make me pause and take a deeper breath. I'd been getting these little twinges for weeks now. Stress, probably. Work had been brutal lately, and Mom's constant criticism about everything from my career choices to my apartment wasn't exactly helping my blood pressure. I adjusted my grip on the shopping cart and continued down the aisle, adding items to my mental checklist. Whole wheat bread for Dad's supposed diet that he never actually followed. Greek yogurt for Mom because she'd read some article about probiotics. Energy drinks for my younger brother Jake, even though they made him jittery and irritable. I never bought anything just for me anymore. Somewhere along the way, my needs had become an afterthought, a footnote in the family grocery list. The checkout line moved slowly, giving me time to scroll through my phone. 3 missed calls from Mom. No voicemails, just the missed call notifications. That somehow felt more demanding than any ringtone. She had this way of calling repeatedly until you answered, then acting like you were the one being difficult when you finally picked up. I'd learned to recognize the pattern. 1 call meant she wanted something. 2 calls meant she wanted it now. 3 calls meant I was already in trouble for not responding fast enough. I paid for the groceries with my debit card, watching the numbers decrease from my checking account. $47.33 for food that would last maybe 3 days if Jake didn't raid the refrigerator during one of his late-night gaming sessions. The cashier, a teenager with purple streaks in her hair, handed me the receipt with a tired smile that suggested she understood the weight of grocery bills and family obligations. The parking lot outside was beginning to empty as the afternoon shifted toward evening. Phoenix in October still carried summer's heat, but with a dryness that made everything feel brittle. I loaded the bags into my Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving since college, with its faded blue paint and the small dent in the rear bumper from when Dad borrowed it last year and backed into a mailbox. He'd offered to pay for the repair, but somehow that conversation had evolved into a lecture about how I needed to be more careful about where I parked. My phone buzzed again as I settled into the driver's seat. Mom. I stared at her contact photo. For a moment, a picture from last Christmas where she was smiling but her eyes held that familiar look of controlled irritation. She'd been upset that day because I'd brought store-bought cookies instead of baking from scratch, as if my 12-hour nursing shifts left me plenty of time for elaborate holiday preparations. I answered on the 4th ring. Hey, Mom. Finally. I've been calling you for an hour. Her voice carried that particular tone that made my shoulders automatically tense. Not quite angry, but definitely not pleased. Where have you been? Grocery shopping. For dinner tonight, remember? I turned the key in the ignition, but didn't put the car in reverse yet. Something about Mom's calls always required my full attention, even for the most mundane conversations. Well, I hope you remembered to get the ingredients for that chicken dish I mentioned. And make sure the chicken is organic this time. Your father's been reading about antibiotics in meat, and you know how he gets when he's worried about his health. I glanced at the grocery bags in my back seat. Regular chicken breast, on sale for $3.99 a pound. The organic option had been nearly double the price, and my budget was already stretched thin after helping Jake with his car insurance payment last week. I got chicken. It'll be fine, Mom. Sarah, fine isn't good enough when it comes to your father's health. He's not getting any younger, and we need to start taking these things seriously. The way she said my name always made me feel like I was 12 years old again, standing in the kitchen while she explained all the ways I'd disappointed her that day. I understand. I'll make sure dinner is good. I rubbed my temple where a headache was beginning to form. The same spot that had been bothering me more frequently lately, usually during or after conversations with my family. And don't forget, Jake has his job interview tomorrow morning. He's nervous about it, so maybe you could call him tonight and give him some encouragement. You know how much he looks up to you. Jake was 26 years old and had been looking for the right opportunity for the past 8 months. This interview was for a part-time position at a local electronics store, which he'd already complained about being beneath his potential, despite having no relevant experience or qualifications for anything better. But pointing that out would only result in another lecture about family support and positive thinking. Of course. I'll call him after dinner. Good. Oh, and your cousin Rebecca is getting married next month. I know it's short notice, but we'll need to get her a nice gift. Something from the family. I was thinking maybe you could handle that since you have better taste than the rest of us. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the headrest. Another expense I hadn't budgeted for, another task that would somehow become my responsibility. Rebecca and I hadn't spoken in over 2 years, not since the family barbecue where she'd made several comments about my boring job and lack of a serious relationship. But in Mom's world, family obligations transcended personal feelings or financial constraints. How much were you thinking? I asked, already calculating how this would affect my grocery budget for the next few weeks. Oh, something nice. 200, maybe 250. Nothing too extravagant, but enough to show we care. $250. Nearly a week's worth of groceries, or half my monthly car payment. I opened my mouth to explain that I couldn't afford that right now, but the familiar knot in my stomach stopped me. The same feeling I got whenever I tried to set boundaries. Or explain my financial limitations. It was easier to just figure it out somehow, even if it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for the next month. Okay. I'll take care of it. Thank you, sweetheart. I knew I could count on you. You're so much more responsible than Jake. Sometimes I don't know what we'd do without you. The compliment should have felt good, but instead it sat heavy in my chest. Being the responsible one meant being the one who fixed things, who absorbed the stress, who made sacrifices so everyone else could be comfortable. It meant my needs always came last, and my feelings were secondary to maintaining family harmony. I should head home and start dinner, I said, glancing at the clock on my dashboard. 5:15. If I started cooking by 6, we could eat by 7:30, assuming Dad didn't work late again and Jake didn't disappear with his friends. Don't forget to call Jake. And maybe use the good plates tonight. Your father had a rough day at work, and it would be nice if dinner felt special. The good plates. The ones I'd bought with my first nursing paycheck, thinking they'd make family dinners feel more elegant. Now they just meant more dishes to wash and more pressure to make everything perfect. But I agreed, because that's what I always did. After hanging up, I sat in the parking lot for another few minutes, watching other shoppers load their cars and drive away to their own family obligations and dinner preparations. Some of them looked tired, like me. Others seemed cheerful, chatting on their phones or humming along to music. I wondered what their family dynamics were like, whether they felt this constant underlying tension or if some families actually enjoyed spending time together without undercurrents of criticism and obligation. The drive home took me through the suburban neighborhood where I'd grown up, past the elementary school where I'd first learned to be the good kid, the one who didn't cause problems. Past the park where I'd spent countless afternoons reading. While other kids played, partly because I genuinely loved books, but mostly because reading was quiet and safe and didn't require the kind of social energy I never seemed to have enough of. My apartment complex was a beige stucco development built in the 90s, with red tile roofs and small patches of desert landscaping that required minimal maintenance. I'd chosen it because it was affordable and close enough to the hospital where I worked that I could get there quickly if I was called in for an emergency shift. The unit itself was small but efficiently arranged, with just enough space for my nursing textbooks, a few plants that somehow survived despite my irregular schedule, and the collection of kitchen gadgets I'd accumulated in hopes of becoming the kind of person who cooked elaborate meals. I carried the grocery bags up the stairs to my second-floor apartment, noting the way my heart rate seemed to spike more than it should from such a simple task. Probably just tired. The 12-hour shifts at the hospital were physically demanding, and I'd been picking up extra hours lately to help cover Jake's expenses and build up my savings for Rebecca's wedding gift. Inside my apartment, the silence felt both peaceful and lonely. No one demanding anything, no one critiquing my choices or asking for favors. Just me and the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the main road. I unpacked the groceries methodically, organizing them in my small refrigerator and pantry according to the meal plan I'd mentally constructed during the shopping trip. As I seasoned the chicken and started chopping vegetables, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Mom said you're calling me tonight. Can we make it quick? Have plans. Plans that probably involved video games and energy drinks, but I didn't respond with that observation. Instead, I simply replied that I'd call around 8. He didn't respond, which wasn't unusual. Jake's communication style consisted mainly of requests for money and complaints about how hard his life was, with occasional expressions of gratitude that felt more obligatory than genuine. The chicken was browning in the pan when another wave of chest tightness hit me, stronger this time. I turned down the heat and sat on one of my kitchen stools, breathing slowly until the sensation passed. Stress was a killer, literally. I knew this from my medical training, had seen patients whose bodies had been damaged by years of chronic stress and anxiety. But knowing something intellectually and changing your life patterns were completely different things. I thought about the other nurses at work, how some of them talked about their families. Lisa in pediatrics had parents who called just to check in, not because they needed something. Maria in the ER had siblings who took turns hosting holidays, sharing the responsibility instead of defaulting to one person. Their family stories sounded foreign to me, like descriptions of a culture I'd only read about but never experienced. By 7:30, dinner was ready. I'd set the good plates on my small dining table, along with cloth napkins and the water glasses that matched the dishes. Everything looked Pinterest-worthy, which would hopefully prevent any comments about my presentation or effort level. I took a picture and sent it to Mom, knowing she'd want visual confirmation that I'd followed her suggestions. Her response came back immediately. "Looks lovely, dear. Dad will appreciate the effort." The effort. As if cooking dinner was some extraordinary gesture instead of a basic human need. But I'd learned long ago that in my family, everything I did was either not quite enough or praiseworthy in a way that felt more like surprise than appreciation. I ate alone, which was actually preferable to eating with company that left me feeling criticized and drained. The chicken had turned out well, seasoned just right and tender without being overcooked. The vegetables retained their color and texture. It was a good meal, and I allowed myself a moment of genuine satisfaction before cleaning up and preparing to call Jake. The conversation lasted 12 minutes and covered his anxiety about the interview, his concerns that the job was beneath his qualifications, and his need for a new laptop because his current one was basically ancient at 3 years old. I listened, offered encouragement, and managed not to point out that being unemployed for 8 months might affect his negotiating position. When he abruptly ended the call because his friends had arrived, I felt relieved rather than offended. As I finished the dishes and wiped down the counters, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. 28 years old, with the same brown hair and hazel eyes I'd inherited from Dad's side of the family, but with an expression that looked older than my age. There were small lines around my eyes that hadn't been there a year ago, and a tightness in my jaw that suggested I'd been clenching my teeth again. I made a mental note to be more conscious of my stress levels, to maybe look into meditation apps or yoga classes. Something to help manage the constant low-level anxiety that seemed to be my default state. But first, I needed to research wedding gifts for Rebecca and figure out how to afford something appropriately generous without completely depleting my savings account. The evening news was playing on my small television as I settled onto my couch, with a cup of herbal tea, something chamomile and lavender that promised relaxation. The anchors discussed local politics, weather patterns, and a story about healthcare workers advocating for better working conditions. I found myself nodding along with their concerns about burnout and stress-related health issues, recognizing my own experiences in their statistics and testimonials. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. My phone remained quiet for the rest of the evening, which was both a relief and somehow disappointing. Part of me craved the peace of uninterrupted time, but another part had become so accustomed to being needed that silence felt almost empty. I'd built my identity around being helpful, reliable, the one people could count on. Without someone to take care of or worry about, I wasn't entirely sure who I was supposed to be. The morning started like any other Wednesday, with my alarm buzzing at 5:30 a.m. and the familiar routine of getting ready for another 12-hour shift at Phoenix General Hospital. I moved through my apartment in the pre-dawn darkness, muscle memory guiding me through the process of showering, dressing in scrubs, and grabbing the protein bar that would serve as breakfast until I could find time for a proper meal sometime. Around noon, the drive to work took me through empty streets lined with palm trees and strip malls, past the 24-hour donut shop where I sometimes stopped for coffee when the hospital machine was broken again. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the desert mountains in shades of purple and gold that made Phoenix beautiful in a way that daylight often obscured. These quiet morning moments were becoming more precious to me, the only time when no one needed anything and my phone stayed silent. I badged into the hospital through the employee entrance, nodding to Marcus, the security guard who'd been working nights for longer than I'd been a nurse. He always had a friendly word and a genuine smile, asking about my weekend or commenting on the weather without any hidden agenda or requests for favors. It struck me how refreshing that felt, how rare it was to have interactions that didn't leave me feeling drained or obligated. The medical surgical unit was already busy despite the early hour. Night shift was preparing to give report, their faces showing the particular exhaustion that came from caring for sick people while the rest of the world slept. I grabbed my assignment sheet from the charge nurse, Jennifer, a woman in her 50s, who ran the unit with military precision and genuine compassion for both patients and staff. Room 314 is post-op day 2 from gallbladder surgery, doing well but anxious about going home, Jennifer briefed me as we walked toward the medication room. Room 318 came in yesterday with pneumonia, elderly gentleman, family's been hovering. But they seem supportive. And 322 is a new admission from last night, diabetic ketoacidosis, 22 years old, still getting stabilized. I nodded, mentally organizing my morning priorities. Check blood sugars, assess surgical sites, administer medications, provide education, comfort families, document everything. The familiar rhythm of hospital nursing that had become second nature. Over the past 6 years. I genuinely loved the work, even when it was physically and emotionally demanding. There was something deeply satisfying about helping people through their most vulnerable moments, using my knowledge and skills to make a real difference in their recovery. But as I prepared medications for my first patient, that familiar chest tightness returned. Sharper this time, accompanied by a strange fluttering sensation that made me pause and place my hand over my heart. The feeling lasted only a few seconds, but it left me slightly breathless and oddly lightheaded. I shook my head and continued drawing up insulin, chalking it up to too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Room 314 contained Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman in her early 60s who reminded me of my high school Spanish teacher. She was sitting up in bed, fully dressed and clearly eager to go home, but her husband looked worried as he helped her pack the few belongings she'd brought to the hospital. "The doctor said I can leave this morning, but what if something goes wrong at home?" she asked as I checked her surgical incision. The site looked clean and well healed, with no signs of infection or complications. "Your incision is healing beautifully," I reassured her, "and you have all the instructions for care at home. Start with light activities and gradually increase as you feel stronger. Most people feel back to normal within a few weeks." Her husband squeezed her hand. "I'll take good care of her. We've been married 43 years, and I'm not letting anything happen to her now." The tenderness in his voice made something twist in my chest that had nothing to do with my recent physical symptoms. When was the last time someone had spoken about me with that kind of protective love? When had anyone in my family expressed genuine concern for my well-being rather than what I could provide for them? I pushed the thought away and focused on discharge education, explaining pain management and when to call the doctor. Mrs. Rodriguez hugged me before leaving, thanking me for taking such good care of her. These moments reminded me why I'd chosen nursing, why the long hours and physical demands felt worthwhile. Room 318 housed Mr. Patterson, the elderly pneumonia patient, surrounded by 3 generations of family members who took turns asking questions and fussing over his comfort. His daughter, a woman about my age, looked exhausted from what was probably days of worry and hospital vigils. "How's his breathing today?" she asked as I listened to his lungs with my stethoscope. "Much clearer than yesterday," I reported. "The antibiotics are working well, and his oxygen levels have been stable all night." The relief on her face was immediate and profound. "Thank goodness. We were so scared when they brought him in. He's been the anchor of our family for so long, we just can't imagine." Her voice trailed off, but I understood. Mr. Patterson was clearly beloved, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about his recovery and well-being. His son-in-law was researching pneumonia recovery online, his grandson was adjusting the television to find his grandfather's favorite news program, and his daughter was coordinating with work to take extended time off for his care. This was what family looked like when it functioned properly. Not perfect, but fundamentally supportive and loving. People who showed up not because they needed something, but because they wanted to help. The contrast with my own family dynamics was stark and painful. As I administered Mr. Patterson's morning medications, another wave of chest pain hit me, this one strong enough to make me grip the bedside table for support. The sensation was like a band tightening around my ribcage, accompanied by a racing heartbeat that felt irregular and concerning. "Are you all right, dear?" Mr. Patterson asked, his weathered face creased with concern. Even while recovering from pneumonia, he was worried about my well-being. "Just tired," I managed, forcing a smile. "Long shift yesterday." But privately, I was beginning to worry. These episodes were becoming more frequent and intense. As a nurse, I knew the signs of cardiac stress, and my body was sending increasingly urgent signals that something was wrong. The rational part of my mind knew I should mention these symptoms to someone, maybe get an EKG or at least check my blood pressure. But the other part, the part that had been trained since childhood to minimize my needs and avoid causing trouble, kept insisting it was nothing serious. Room 322 contained Ashley, the young woman with diabetic ketoacidosis. She was awake but groggy, her parents sitting on either side of her bed looking haggard and frightened. DKA was serious business, potentially life-threatening if not treated aggressively, and this girl couldn't have been much older than Jake. "How are you feeling this morning?" I asked, checking her foresight and reviewing her blood glucose readings. "From overnight. Better, I think. Still pretty weak." Her voice was hoarse from dehydration and the stress her body had endured. My parents are freaking out though. Her mother, a woman with Ashley's same dark hair and delicate features, looked up with red-rimmed eyes. We had no idea how serious this could get. She's been managing her diabetes since she was 14, but with college stress and working part-time, she got behind on her insulin routine. The father nodded grimly. We should have been paying closer attention. Should have insisted she come home more often so we could help monitor things. Type 1 diabetes is challenging for anyone, I said gently, especially young adults trying to balance independence with health management. The important thing is that she's here now getting the treatment she needs. As I hung Ashley's insulin drip and documented her vital signs, I found myself thinking about the dedication her parents showed. They'd obviously driven through the night. When they got the call, probably terrified they might lose their daughter. Now they were planning to stay until she was discharged, rearranging work schedules and responsibilities without question or resentment. When was the last time my parents had dropped everything for my well-being? I couldn't remember mom or dad ever sitting vigil during my childhood illnesses, or showing this kind of genuine concern for my health and safety. Even when I'd been hospitalized briefly during nursing school for appendicitis, mom's primary concern had been whether I'd miss too much clinical time and fall behind in my program. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of assessments, medications, and documentation. But the chest pain continued to worsen, now accompanied by episodes of dizziness that forced me to sit down between patient rooms. During my scheduled break, I checked my blood pressure on one of the unit machines. 160/95. Higher than it should be for someone my age and fitness level. I stared at the numbers, knowing I should report this to Jennifer or at least mention it to one of the physicians on rounds. Hypertension combined with chest pain in a 28-year-old warranted investigation. But I also knew that reporting symptoms would mean being pulled from my assignment, possibly sent to the emergency department as a patient rather than a caregiver. My patients needed me, and we were already short-staffed. How could I add to everyone's burden by creating more work? Besides, it was probably just stress. The family dynamics, the financial pressure, the constant feeling of being pulled in multiple directions. Once I got through this shift and had a couple days off, everything would settle down. I just needed to push through, but as I walked back toward my patients' rooms, another episode hit with frightening intensity. The chest pain was now accompanied by shortness of breath, nausea, and a crushing sensation that made me lean against the wall for support. My vision grayed at the edges, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might actually pass out in the hospital corridor. Sarah? Jennifer's voice seemed to come from far away, though she was standing right beside me. What's going on? You look terrible. I tried to straighten up, to project the competence and reliability that everyone expected from me. I'm okay. Just need a minute. But I wasn't okay, and the concerned expression on Jennifer's face told me my attempt at normalcy wasn't convincing anyone. Other staff members were starting to notice, their conversations quieting as they observed their colleague having what was clearly a medical episode. Sit down, Jennifer commanded, guiding me to a nearby chair. Right now. Someone get me a blood pressure cuff and call Dr. Martinez. No, really, I'm fine, I protested, even as my body betrayed me with another wave of pain that made me double over. I just need some water and maybe a snack. Low blood sugar, probably. But Jennifer wasn't buying it, and neither was Dr. Martinez when he appeared at my side with a stethoscope and the kind of professional concern that made my nurse's instincts recognize a serious situation. They were treating me like a patient, which felt foreign and uncomfortable and somehow wrong. Sarah, you're having chest pain and your blood pressure is elevated, Dr. Martinez said in his calm, authoritative voice. We need to get you down to the ED for evaluation. This isn't optional. The emergency department. As a patient. The irony wasn't lost on me as they helped me into a wheelchair, despite my continued protests that I could walk perfectly well. I'd spent countless hours in this same ED, caring for other people in crisis, and now I was being wheeled through those same automatic doors with my coworkers looking on with mixture of concern and professional curiosity. The ED was busy, as always, but Dr. Kim, the attending physician, took one look at my presentation and immediately ordered an EKG and blood work. I found myself in one of the cardiac monitoring rooms, still wearing my scrubs but now connected to machines that would analyze the very symptoms I'd been trying to ignore. How long have you been having chest pain? Dr. Kim asked as the EKG printed out its interpretation of my heart's electrical activity. A few weeks, on and off, I admitted reluctantly. Nothing severe until today. Any family history of heart disease? High blood pressure? Diabetes? I shook my head, though I realized I didn't actually know much about my family's medical history. Conversations with my parents rarely ventured into topics that didn't somehow relate to their immediate needs or concerns. I couldn't remember ever discussing their health histories or risk factors. The blood work results came back showing elevated cardiac enzymes, confirming that my heart muscle was under stress. The EKG revealed irregularities that Dr. Kim described as concerning but not immediately life-threatening. Still, he wanted to admit me for observation and further testing. I can't stay, I said automatically. I have patients to take care of, and I'm supposed to work again tomorrow. Dr. Kim gave me the kind of look I'd given my own patients when they tried to minimize serious symptoms. Sarah, you're a nurse. You know what these results mean. Your heart is telling us something important, and ignoring it could have serious consequences. As I lay in the ED bed, waiting for a room assignment and trying to process the reality of being a patient rather than a caregiver, I realized I needed to call my family. Mom would need to know why I wouldn't be available for dinner plans or family obligations. The thought of that conversation filled me with almost as much dread as the cardiac symptoms that had brought me here. I reached for my phone, scrolling to Mom's contact, and hesitated. How do you tell your family that you're in the hospital when you've spent years being the strong one, the reliable one, the person who takes care of everyone else's problems? How do you admit vulnerability to people who've never really seen you as anything other than a source of support and solutions? The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before Mom answered with her usual tone of mild irritation. Sarah? Aren't you supposed to be working? Why are you calling? I took a deep breath, tasting the recycled hospital air and feeling the weight of the heart monitor leads taped to my chest. Mom, I'm in the hospital. I had some chest pain at work, and they're keeping me for observation. There was a pause, but not the kind of pause that suggested shock or concern. More like the pause of someone processing an inconvenience. What do you mean, chest pain? Are you being dramatic again? You know how you get when you're stressed. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing what little breath I had left. Being dramatic. As if my symptoms were some kind of performance rather than genuine medical concern. As if lying in a hospital bed connected to cardiac monitors was somehow an overreaction to normal life stress. The doctors think it might be related to my heart, I said quietly, still hoping for some expression of concern or support. Well, you're young and healthy, Mom replied dismissively. It's probably just anxiety. You've always been high-strung. When will you be discharged? We need to discuss Rebecca's wedding gift, and your father wants to go over some financial planning stuff with you this weekend. I closed my eyes, feeling the heart monitor registering the spike in my pulse that accompanied this conversation. Even now, even while I was literally hooked up to machines monitoring my cardiac function, my family's primary concern was when I'd be available to handle their needs and requests. I don't know when I'll be discharged, Mom. They want to run more tests. More tests? Sarah, you can't just lie around in a hospital bed indefinitely. You have responsibilities. And besides, those bills are going to be expensive, even with your insurance. Is this really necessary? The question hung in the air between us, carried by hospital phone lines and years of learned patterns. Is this really necessary? As if my health, my well-being, my physical symptoms were optional. As if seeking medical care was somehow selfish or excessive rather than the basic self-preservation that any reasonable person would expect. And in that moment, lying in a hospital bed with my heart rate elevated and my family treating my medical emergency as an inconvenience, something fundamental shifted inside me. Not dramatically, not with any grand revelation, but quietly and decisively. Like a door closing softly but permanently, the cardiology unit at Phoenix General was quieter than the emergency department, with longer corridors and rooms designed for patients who needed extended monitoring rather than immediate intervention. They'd moved me here after the initial tests confirmed that my heart was indeed under significant stress, though the exact cause remained unclear. Dr. Patel, the cardiologist who'd been assigned to my case, was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s, who had a way of explaining complex medical information that was both thorough and reassuring. Your echocardiogram shows some changes that suggest your heart has been working harder than it should, she explained, pulling up images on the computer screen beside my bed. The good news is that we're not seeing signs of permanent damage. The concerning news is that these changes didn't happen overnight. I stared at the black and white ultrasound images of my own heart, watching the chambers contract and expand in real time. It was surreal to see the organ that had been causing me so much distress, to observe its mechanical function while feeling so disconnected from my own body's signals. How long has this been building? I asked, though part of me already suspected. The answer. Based on what we're seeing, probably months. Maybe longer. Chronic stress can have profound effects on cardiovascular health, especially in young women. The symptoms you described, the chest tightness, irregular heartbeat, elevated blood pressure, these are your body's way of saying it's been pushed beyond its normal limits. Months. I thought back over the past year, trying to identify when the symptoms had first started. But the truth was, I'd been feeling overwhelmed and physically drained for so long that I couldn't pinpoint an exact beginning. The constant family demands, the financial pressure, the emotional exhaustion of being everyone's solution to their problems, it had all accumulated so gradually that I'd simply accepted feeling terrible as my normal state. The treatment plan is going to involve more than just medication, Dr. Patel continued. We can give you beta blockers to help manage your blood pressure and heart rate, but the underlying issue is stress management. You're going to need to make some significant lifestyle changes. Lifestyle changes. The phrase felt both hopeful and terrifying. I knew she was right, my current way of living was literally damaging my heart. But changing my patterns meant disappointing people, setting boundaries, saying no to requests that I'd been conditioned to automatically fulfill. It meant redefining relationships that had been built entirely around my willingness to give without receiving. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts, and Jennifer appeared in the doorway holding a small bouquet of flowers from the unit's gift shop. How are you feeling? The whole floor has been asking about you. The genuine concern in her voice was almost overwhelming. Here were my coworkers, people who saw me for 40 hours a week but didn't share my DNA, showing more authentic care than my own family had managed during our phone conversation. Better, I think. Still processing everything. I gestured to the monitors and 4 lines that connected me to various machines. It's strange being on this side of the medical equipment. Jennifer sat in the visitor's chair, her expression serious but kind. Sarah, I've been watching you for the past year, and I've been worried. You take on extra shifts when we're short-staffed, you never call in sick even when you should, and you always volunteer for the most challenging assignments. But you also look exhausted most of the time, and you seem to carry stress in a way that's not sustainable. Her observations hit uncomfortably close to home. I had been running myself ragged, both at work and in my personal life, believing that pushing through was a virtue rather than recognizing it as a symptom of deeper problems. I just want to do a good job, I said, hearing how inadequate that sounded even as the words left my mouth. You do an excellent job. That's not the issue. The issue is that you're giving so much of yourself that there's nothing left for your own well-being. And now your body is forcing you to pay attention. As if to emphasize her point, my phone buzzed with a text message. Jake, Mom said you're in the hospital. When are you getting out? Need to talk to you about my interview yesterday. Not, are you okay, or what happened, or do you need anything? Just a timeline for when I'd be available to focus on his needs again. I showed the message to Jennifer, who read it with raised eyebrows. That's your brother? Unfortunately. I turned the phone face down, not wanting to see whatever follow-up messages might arrive. He had a job interview yesterday. Apparently. My cardiac event is mainly relevant in terms of how it affects his ability to debrief about his employment situation. Jennifer's expression shifted to something that looked like protective anger. Sarah, that's not normal family behavior. Healthy families rally around sick members. They don't treat medical emergencies as scheduling inconveniences. Her words unlocked something I'd been suppressing for years. The recognition that my family's response to my hospitalization wasn't just disappointing, it was genuinely abnormal. Most people's relatives would have been at the hospital within hours. They would have brought comfort items, asked detailed questions about my condition, coordinated time off work to provide support. Instead, I was lying alone in a cardiac unit while my family treated my health crisis as a minor disruption to their routine. I keep thinking about my patients' families, I admitted. Mrs. Rodriguez's husband yesterday, taking care of her after surgery. Mr. Patterson's daughter, coordinating his care and staying by his bedside. Even Ashley's parents, driving through the night when she was admitted with DKA. That's what family support looks like, isn't it? Jennifer nodded. That's exactly what it looks like. People who love you show up. They prioritize your well-being over their convenience. They don't make you feel guilty for needing help. The contrast was stark and painful. I'd been so conditioned to minimize my own needs that I'd accepted my family's emotional absence as normal. But seeing genuine family dynamics through my patients had highlighted just how dysfunctional my own relationships had become. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Mom's contact photo filled the screen, the same Christmas picture where her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but some ingrained sense of obligation made me answer. Hi, Mom. Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I talked to your father, and we're concerned that you might be overreacting to normal stress symptoms. You know how the medical field can make people hypochondriacal. I felt Jennifer's eyes on me as I processed this latest dismissal of my legitimate medical condition. Mom, I'm in the cardiac unit. They're monitoring my heart because the test showed actual damage from chronic stress. Well, doctors like to order tests. It's how they make money. But you're young and you've always been healthy. This is probably just a phase. A phase. As if heart damage was something I'd outgrow, like a teenage fascination with boy bands or a temporary interest in vegetarianism. The cardiologist says I need to make significant lifestyle changes, including reducing stress. Oh, Sarah, you can't just avoid stress. That's life. Everyone has obligations and responsibilities. You can't just decide to opt out because you're feeling overwhelmed. The irony was staggering. Here was my mother, one of the primary sources of my chronic stress, lecturing me about the inevitability of stress while I lay in a hospital bed with stress-induced heart damage. I'm not trying to opt out of life, Mom. I'm trying to prioritize my health. Well, I hope you're not planning to use this as an excuse to shirk your family responsibilities. Rebecca's wedding gift still needs to be handled, and Jake really needs your support right now with his job search. I looked at Jennifer, who was listening to this conversation with an expression of increasing disbelief. Here I was, literally hospitalized for stress-related heart problems, and my mother was using the call to remind me of my obligations to purchase wedding gifts and provide emotional support to my unemployed adult brother. Mom, I need to focus on getting better right now. Of course, dear. But getting better means getting back to normal, and normal includes being there for your family. You know we depend on you. After I hung up, Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about the answer. When was the last time your family did something for you without being asked? When did they last check on your well-being without needing something in return? I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. I searched my memory for examples of unsolicited support or care from my parents or Jake. Birthday calls that weren't followed by requests for favors. Check-ins during stressful periods at work. Offers of help when I was clearly struggling. The silence stretched uncomfortably as I realized I couldn't think of a single instance. They're not bad people, I said finally, though the words felt hollow. They've gotten used to me being the one who handles things. But at what cost to you? Jennifer asked. Look where handling things has gotten you. You're 28 years old with stress-induced heart damage because you've been carrying everyone else's emotional and financial burdens. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Dad. Your mother told me about your hospital stay. Hope it's nothing serious. Can you call me when you get a chance? Need to discuss some investment options. I've been researching investment options. While I was in cardiac care, Jennifer read the message over my shoulder and shook her head. Sarah, this isn't normal. This isn't how people who love you behave when you're in the hospital. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were undeniably true. My family didn't love me, they loved what I provided for them. They loved my reliability, my financial contributions, my willingness to absorb their stress and solve their problems. But they didn't love me as a person with my own needs, feelings, and limitations. Dr. Patel returned during visiting hours with additional test results and a treatment plan that included both medical intervention and lifestyle modifications. The stress test had revealed further evidence of chronic cardiovascular strain, confirming that my body had been operating in crisis mode for an extended period. I'm prescribing medication to help manage your blood pressure and heart rate, she explained, but the most important component of your treatment is going to be stress reduction. That means identifying the sources of chronic stress in your life and making changes to eliminate or minimize them. What if the stress sources are family relationships? I asked, glancing at Jennifer, who nodded encouragingly. Dr. Patel's expression grew more serious. Family stress can be particularly damaging because it's often chronic and feels inescapable. But Sarah, you need to understand that maintaining relationships that are literally damaging your heart isn't sustainable. You have to choose between preserving these dynamics and preserving your health. The choice, when framed so starkly, seemed obvious. But years of conditioning made it feel impossibly difficult. How do you walk away from family? How do you set boundaries with people who've never respected boundaries? How do you prioritize your own well-being when you've been taught that doing so is selfish? I keep thinking about my patients, I told Dr. Patel. The ones who have heart attacks or strokes from chronic stress. They always say they wish they'd made changes sooner, wish they'd listened to their bodies before it was too late. Exactly. You're fortunate that we caught this before permanent damage occurred. But that window won't stay open indefinitely. Your body is giving you a clear message about what needs to change. That evening, as the hospital settled into its quieter nighttime rhythm, I lay in my bed thinking about the patterns that had brought me here. The constant guilt whenever I considered saying no to family requests. The automatic assumption that their needs took precedence over mine. The way I'd normalized feeling overwhelmed and physically depleted because it was easier than confronting the dysfunction in my relationships. I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's husband, the way he'd spoken about protecting her health and well-being. About Mr. Patterson's family, organizing their lives around his recovery. About Ashley's parents, dropping everything to be present during her crisis. That was what love looked like, prioritizing someone's well-being, supporting their healing. Showing up without being asked. My family's response to my hospitalization had been the opposite of love. It had been denial, dismissal, and continued pressure to prioritize their needs over my recovery. They weren't just failing to support my healing, they were actively undermining it. Around midnight, my phone lit up with a text from Mom. Talked to Jake. He didn't get the job. He's pretty upset and could really use his big sister right now. Can you call him tomorrow? I stared at the message for a long time, feeling my heart rate spike in response to this latest demand. Jake was upset about not getting a job, so my role was to provide comfort and reassurance, despite being hospitalized for stress-related heart problems. The irony was almost absurd, but instead of the familiar guilt and automatic compliance, I felt something different. Clarity. Cold, sharp clarity about what these relationships actually were and what they were costing me. I turned off my phone without responding and lay back against the hospital pillows, listening to the steady beeping of my heart monitor. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was going to put my own health first. I was going to choose recovery over obligation, healing over guilt, my well-being over their convenience. The decision felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I didn't know exactly how I was going to implement these changes or what the consequences would be. But I knew that lying in this hospital bed, connected to machines monitoring my damaged heart, was a direct result of years of prioritizing everyone else's needs over my own basic well-being, and I knew that I couldn't continue down that path without destroying myself completely. In the morning, I would start making different choices. I would start saying no. I would start protecting the heart that had literally been crying out for protection. I would start treating myself with the same care and consideration I'd been giving to everyone else. The heart monitor continued its steady rhythm beside me, recording each beat of the organ that was finally going to receive the protection it deserved. Thursday morning arrived with the antiseptic smell of hospital breakfast and the soft shuffle of nursing shoes in the corridor. I'd slept better than I had in months, possibly because the cardiac monitors provided a strange kind of security. Someone was literally watching over my heart while I rested. Dr. Patel had scheduled my discharge for later that afternoon, contingent on my blood pressure remaining stable and my completing what she called discharge planning for lifestyle modifications. The social worker assigned to my case was a woman named Angela Torres, probably in her mid-30s, with kind eyes and the sort of calm presence that suggested she'd heard every family dysfunction story imaginable. She pulled up a chair beside my bed with a tablet and an expression that was both professional and genuinely caring. Dr. Patel asked me to meet with you about developing strategies for managing the stress factors that contributed to your current condition, she began. From what I understand, family relationships are a significant component of what we need to address. I nodded, still feeling slightly surreal about discussing my family dynamics with a medical professional. I've been thinking about it since yesterday. My family's reaction to me being hospitalized has been eye-opening. Can you tell me about that reaction? I described the phone conversations, the dismissal of my symptoms as dramatic overreaction, the immediate focus on when I'd be available to handle their needs again. Angela listened without judgment, occasionally making notes on her tablet. What you're describing sounds like a pattern of emotional invalidation, she said when I finished. Your family has learned to rely on you as their primary source of support, both emotional and financial. When you need support in return, they're either unable or unwilling to provide it. But they're not intentionally cruel, I said, feeling the need to defend them despite everything. They've gotten used to me being the strong one. Angela nodded thoughtfully. Many people in your situation feel conflicted about setting boundaries because they don't want to seem ungrateful or selfish. But Sarah, let me ask you this, if a friend was hospitalized for stress-related heart problems, and their family responded the way yours has, what would you think about that situation? I considered the question, imagining Jennifer or one of my other colleagues in my position. If their family had dismissed their medical emergency and immediately started discussing their own needs, I would have been appalled. I would have recognized it as emotional abuse disguised as normal family dynamics. I'd think their family was being incredibly selfish and harmful, I admitted. Exactly. You have clarity about healthy relationship dynamics when you observe them from the outside. The challenge is applying that same clarity to your own situation. Angela helped me identify specific patterns that needed to change. The automatic financial support without question or timeline for repayment. The emotional labor of managing Jake's career disappointments and Dad's various anxieties. The constant availability for family crises while receiving no reciprocal support during my own difficulties. The goal isn't to cut off all contact, she explained, but to establish boundaries that protect your physical and emotional health. That might mean saying no to financial requests, limiting the time you spend discussing their problems, and refusing to be the family's primary emotional caretaker. We practiced scripts for setting boundaries, phrases I could use when family members made requests that exceeded my capacity or violated my new limits. The words felt foreign in my mouth. I'm not able to help with that right now, and that doesn't work for me, and I need to prioritize my health. Simple sentences that carried the weight of fundamental relationship changes. What if they get angry? I asked. What if they accuse me of being selfish or ungrateful? Then they're telling you exactly who they are, Angela replied. People who truly care about your well-being will respect boundaries that protect your health. People who get angry about those boundaries are revealing that they value what you provide more than who you are. Around noon, my phone started buzzing with increasing frequency. Jake had apparently shared the news of my hospitalization with his friends, and Mom was frustrated that the whole situation was becoming public knowledge. There were multiple missed calls and a series of texts that escalated from mild irritation to outright anger. Sarah, call me immediately. This is ridiculous. People are asking questions about why you're in the hospital and I don't know what to tell them. Your brother is upset and you're not even responding to him. This is exactly the kind of selfishness that's caused problems in this family. I showed the messages to Angela, who read them with the professional composure of someone accustomed to family dysfunction. Notice the pattern, she said. Your hospitalization has become about their embarrassment and inconvenience. Your brother's emotional needs are prioritized over your physical recovery. And when you don't respond immediately, you're accused of selfishness. The irony was staggering. I was being called selfish for focusing on my own medical recovery while in the hospital for stress-related heart damage caused by years of putting everyone else's needs first. Dr. Patel returned with my discharge paperwork and final instructions. My blood pressure had stabilized with medication, and the follow-up plan included regular cardiology appointments, stress management counseling, and gradual lifestyle modifications. Remember, this isn't just about medication, she emphasized. The changes you make in your daily life and relationships will determine whether this is a wake-up call that leads to better health or a warning sign you ignore until more serious damage occurs. I signed the discharge papers with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Leaving the hospital meant returning to the environment and relationships that had contributed to my condition. But it also meant having the opportunity to implement the changes Angela and I had discussed. Jennifer appeared as I was gathering my belongings, offering to drive me home since I wasn't supposed to drive while adjusting to the new cardiac medication. How are you feeling about going back to your regular routine? She asked as we walked toward the elevator. Terrified, I admitted. It's one thing to plan boundaries and practice scripts in a hospital room. It's another thing to actually implement them when your family is pressuring you to go back to the old patterns. You don't have to change everything at once, Jennifer reminded me. Start small. Say no to one request. Set one boundary. Build your confidence gradually. The drive to my apartment gave me time to think about what starting small might look like. My phone had been buzzing continuously during the discharge process, indicating that my family's frustration was escalating. I would need to respond eventually, but I could choose when and how. My apartment felt different when I walked through the door. The same furniture and belongings, but somehow the space felt more peaceful, less weighed down by obligation and guilt. Maybe it was the cardiac medication, or maybe it was the psychological effect of having given myself permission to prioritize my own well-being. I settled onto my couch and finally opened the accumulated messages from my family. The progression was predictable: confusion about why I wasn't responding, irritation about the inconvenience of my hospitalization, anger about my selfishness, and finally manipulation disguised as concern. Mom's latest message read, "Sarah, we're worried about you. This isn't like you to ignore your family when we need you. Jake is really struggling right now, and your father is stressed about the wedding expenses. We need you to call us back so we can figure out how to handle everything." I stared at the message for a long time, parsing its carefully constructed guilt. I was ignoring my family when they needed me, not when I needed them. Jake was struggling, Dad was stressed, and somehow those concerns took precedence over my recent cardiac emergency. The implication was clear: my role was to absorb their stress, not to create more stress by having health problems of my own. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't immediately respond. Instead, I set the phone aside and made myself a cup of tea, moving slowly and deliberately through the familiar motions. The simple act of not jumping to address their concerns felt revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. An hour later, my phone rang. Mom, of course. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message she left. Sarah, this is getting ridiculous. I don't know what's gotten into you, but you can't just disappear when your family needs you. Call me back right now. We have things to discuss, and Jake is getting more upset by the hour. The entitlement in her voice was stunning. I'd been hospitalized less than 48 hours ago, and her primary concern was my availability to manage Jake's emotions and whatever family business required my attention. I called Angela instead. She'd given me her direct number with instructions to reach out if I needed support implementing the changes we'd discussed. How are you doing with the transition back home? She asked. It's harder than I expected. They're escalating the pressure, and I can feel myself wanting to just give in and handle whatever crisis they're creating. That's completely normal. You're fighting against years of conditioning. What specific boundary do you want to practice setting first? I looked at my phone, which was now showing 3 more missed calls from Mom and a text from Dad that simply said, "Call your mother." I think I need to have a conversation where I explicitly tell them that I'm going to be less available while I focus on my health. That their problems aren't automatically my emergencies anymore. That's a significant boundary to set. Are you ready for their reaction? I thought about lying in the hospital bed, watching my heart rate spike every time my family contacted me. About the years of exhaustion and stress that had literally damaged my cardiovascular system. About the contrast between my family's response to my medical emergency and the genuine care I'd witnessed from my patients' families. I'm ready, I said, and meant it. Angela helped me plan the conversation, emphasizing the importance of staying calm, avoiding justification for reasonable boundaries, and refusing to be drawn into arguments about my choices. Remember, she said, you're not asking for permission to prioritize your health. You're informing them of changes you're making for medical reasons. I hung up with Angela and immediately called Mom back before I could lose my nerve. Finally, she answered. Sarah, what is going on with you? This behavior is completely unacceptable. Mom, I need to tell you about some changes I'm going to be making based on my doctor's recommendations. Changes? What kind of changes? Sarah, you can't just decide to abandon your responsibilities because you had some stress. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart rate increase but pushing forward anyway. I'm going to be less available for family problems while I focus on my health recovery. The doctors have been very clear that I need to reduce stress, and that means changing how I handle family situations. This is ridiculous. Everyone has stress, Sarah. You can't just opt out of family life because you're feeling overwhelmed. I'm not opting out. I'm setting boundaries that my medical team says are necessary for my recovery. What kind of boundaries? Her voice had shifted to the tone she used when she sensed she was losing control of a situation. I won't be providing financial support for non-emergency situations. I won't be available to manage Jake's emotional crises. And I won't be taking on responsibilities that aren't actually mine to handle. The silence that followed was heavy with shock and anger. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. After everything your family has done for you, this is how you repay us? By abandoning us when we need you most. The use of my full name was designed to make me feel like a child being scolded, but instead it crystallized my resolve. I was a grown woman who'd been hospitalized for stress-related heart damage, and my mother was trying to shame me for prioritizing my medical recovery. Mom, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm following doctor's orders to reduce stress so I don't end up back in the hospital with more serious heart problems. This isn't about your health. This is about you being selfish and ungrateful. Your father and I raised you better than this. The accusation of selfishness for protecting my own health while recovering from a cardiac event was so absurd that it actually helped clarify the situation. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a communication problem. This was my mother explicitly stating that my health was less important than my availability to serve the family's needs. I understand you're upset, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. But these changes aren't negotiable. They're medical recommendations that I'm going to follow. Fine. If this is the kind of person you want to be, that's your choice. But don't expect your family to be waiting around when you decide you need us again. The threat was implicit but clear: conform to their expectations or face rejection and abandonment. It was the ultimate manipulation, designed to force me back into compliance through fear of losing my family connections. But as I sat in my quiet apartment, still feeling the residual effects of stress-induced heart damage, the threat felt less terrifying than it once would have. What exactly would I be losing? The privilege of having my medical emergencies dismissed? The joy of being contacted only when someone needed money or emotional labor? The wonderful experience of having my health sacrificed for other people's convenience. I understand, I said simply. That's your choice to make. After I hung up, my hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of protecting myself instead of absorbing someone else's emotional volatility. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with angry texts from Jake and a furious voicemail from Dad. But for the first time, their anger felt like their problem to manage rather than mine to fix. I turned off my phone and sat in the peaceful silence of my apartment, listening to my own heartbeat and feeling the absence of chronic stress in my body. The path forward would be challenging, but I'd taken the first crucial step, choosing my own well-being over their comfort, and my heart, both literally and figuratively, felt stronger already. The weekend passed in an unusual bubble of tranquility. No family emergencies requiring immediate attention, no guilt-inducing phone calls about obligations I was supposedly neglecting, no texts demanding instant responses to non-urgent matters. I'd kept my phone on silent since Thursday's boundary-setting conversation with Mom, checking it periodically but not allowing it to dictate my schedule or emotional state. The messages that accumulated told a predictable story of escalation. Jake's initial confusion about my unavailability had transformed into wounded accusations of abandonment. Dad's voicemails progressed from stern disappointment to outright anger about my sudden personality change and lack of family loyalty. Mom's texts cycled through various manipulation tactics, guilt, threats, false concern, and passive-aggressive observations about how some people handle family responsibilities, but the most revealing message came from Aunt Miriam, my mother's sister, who'd apparently been recruited to the campaign to restore my previous compliance. Her text arrived Sunday evening. "Honey, your mother is beside herself with worry about this phase you're going through. We all understand that work stress can make people act out, but you're hurting people who love you. Family therapy might help you work through whatever anger you're holding on to." The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and deliberate. My boundary setting was reframed as a phase and acting out, suggesting temporary irrationality rather than legitimate self-protection. My medical recovery was dismissed as work stress, minimizing the serious nature of my cardiac condition. Most insidiously, their harmful behavior was repackaged as love, making my resistance to it seem ungrateful and cruel. I screenshot the message and sent it to Angela, who responded within an hour with validation and analysis. "This is textbook emotional manipulation," she wrote back. "Notice how they're pathologizing your healthy boundaries and recruiting extended family to pressure you back into compliance. This kind of escalation is actually a good sign. It means your boundaries are working, and they're getting desperate to restore the old dynamic." Monday morning brought my return to work, 3 12-hour shifts that I'd been dreading since my discharge. Not because of the physical demands of nursing, but because I worried about my ability to maintain my new boundaries while managing the stress of patient care. Dr. Patel had cleared me for work with restrictions on overtime and requirements for regular breaks to monitor my blood pressure. Jennifer met me at the elevator with a warm smile and careful eyes that suggested she was assessing my well-being without making a big production of it. "How was your first weekend back home?" she asked as we walked toward the nurses' station. "Complicated. My family is not adjusting well to my new approach to their demands." "Are you surprised?" I considered the question while reviewing my patient assignments for the day. Room 314 had a new patient, a middle-aged woman recovering from emergency gallbladder surgery. Room 318 housed an elderly man with congestive heart failure, and room 322 contained a young father who'd suffered a minor heart attack at 34. Not surprised, exactly. But I underestimated how aggressive their pushback would be. They've recruited extended family members to pressure me, and they're treating my medical recovery like a personal attack on them. Jennifer nodded knowingly. People who benefit from dysfunction will always resist when you try to establish healthy patterns. The question is whether you're prepared to outlast their tantrum. My first patient of the day was Mrs. Chen, the gallbladder surgery recovery. She was sitting up in bed looking uncomfortable but alert, with her adult daughter helping her sip ice water through a straw. "How's your pain level this morning?" I asked, checking her surgical site and reviewing her overnight vital signs. "Much better than yesterday. The doctor says I can probably go home tomorrow if everything continues healing well." She winced slightly as she shifted position. "My daughter drove up from Tucson as soon as she heard about the surgery. She's taking the whole week off work to help me recover." The daughter, a woman about my age, looked up from organizing her mother's get-well cards. "Mom always took care of everyone else when we were growing up. Now it's our turn to take care of her." The simple statement hit me with unexpected force. Here was a family where caregiving flowed both directions, where adult children felt grateful for past care and eager to reciprocate when their parent needed support. The contrast with my own family dynamics was stark and painful. That sounds like a wonderful relationship, I said, adjusting Mrs. Chen's for and updating her pain medication schedule. We're very lucky, the daughter agreed. Mom taught us that family means showing up for each other, especially during difficult times. After completing Mrs. Chen's care, I moved to room 318, where Mr. Davidson was struggling with the dietary restrictions imposed by his heart failure diagnosis. His son, a man in his 50s, was patiently explaining the new meal plan while his daughter-in-law researched heart-healthy recipes on her phone. I know it's a big adjustment, Dad, the son was saying, but we want you around for a lot more years. We'll figure out how to make healthy food that you actually enjoy eating. Mr. Davidson grumbled good-naturedly about giving up his beloved bacon, but it was clear that he felt supported rather than criticized. His family was adapting their own cooking habits to make his dietary changes easier, turning his health needs into a collaborative family project rather than a burden. The patient in room 322 provided the most profound contrast to my family experience. David Martinez was only 6 years older than me, a construction worker who'd suffered his heart attack during a routine job site inspection. His wife Elena had barely left his bedside since his admission, and their 2 young children had made him a poster covered with crayon drawings and messages like, "Get better soon, Daddy." The scariest part wasn't the chest pain, David told me as I checked his cardiac monitors. It was thinking I might not see my kids grow up, that Elena would have to handle everything alone. Elena squeezed his hand. "The only thing that matters is that you're okay. Everything else we can figure out together." I keep thinking I should have paid more attention to the warning signs, David continued. The stress at work, not sleeping well, feeling tired all the time. I thought I was just pushing through like you're supposed to. His words resonated deeply with my own recent experience. The dangerous belief that pushing through exhaustion and stress was virtuous rather than self-destructive. The idea that ignoring your body's distress signals demonstrated strength rather than revealed poor self-care. Stress can be a silent killer, I said, checking his blood pressure and noting the improvement since admission. The important thing is that you're taking it seriously now and making changes to protect your health. Elena's already researching stress management techniques and healthier recipes, David said with a grateful look at his wife. She's turning this into a family project to help me recover and stay healthy. During my lunch break, I called Angela to process the emotional impact of witnessing these healthy family dynamics while dealing with my own family's continued pressure campaign. "It's painful to see what you've been missing," Angela acknowledged. "But it's also hopeful. You're seeing evidence that healthy families do exist, that the treatment you've been accepting isn't normal or inevitable." My phone has 17 unread messages from various family members. They're not giving up. What kinds of messages? I scrolled through the accumulation of texts, voicemails, and missed calls. Jake sent a long text about how my abandonment is affecting his mental health and job search motivation. Dad left a voicemail explaining how disappointed he is in my selfishness. Mom sent 3 messages about urgent family matters that require my immediate attention. And now cousins I haven't heard from in years are reaching out with concern about my behavioral changes. Classic escalation pattern. When initial guilt and anger don't work, they expand the circle of people applying pressure. How are you feeling about maintaining your boundaries under this kind of siege? I considered the question while watching other hospital employees navigate their lunch hour. Some were checking their phones constantly, stress evident in their postures as they dealt with family or personal issues. Others seemed relaxed, eating peacefully without the constant buzz of demanding notifications. I'm realizing that their desperation to restore the old dynamic is actually evidence that my boundaries are necessary and effective. If they respected my well-being, they wouldn't be fighting so hard against changes my doctor recommended for my heart health. Exactly. People who love you want you to be healthy and happy, even if it means adjusting their expectations or behaviors. That afternoon brought an unexpected test of my resolve. Around 3 p.m., during what should have been a routine medication pass, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered, thinking it might be related to work or a medical appointment. "Sarah, thank God." It was Jake, calling from someone else's phone. "I've been trying to reach you for days. This is an emergency." My heart rate spiked automatically, the old programming kicking in despite my new awareness. "What kind of emergency?" "I got a call from a company that wants to interview me for a really good position, but I need to drive to Flagstaff tomorrow for the meeting. My car's making that weird noise again, and I don't think it'll make the trip. I need to borrow your car." I paused in the medication room, recognizing the familiar pattern. A request framed as an emergency, designed to bypass rational consideration and trigger my automatic compliance. Jake needing my car for a job interview wasn't actually an emergency, it was poor planning disguised as crisis. "Jake, I can't lend you my car tomorrow. I'm working, and I needed to get to and from the hospital." "Sarah, this could be the job that changes everything for me. You know how long I've been looking for the right opportunity. Can't you take an Uber or get a ride from someone?" The audacity was breathtaking. He expected me to arrange alternative transportation for my 12-hour nursing shift so he could use my car for a job interview he'd apparently just learned about. No consideration of my schedule, my needs, or the fact that I'd just been hospitalized for stress-related heart problems. "I understand this interview is important to you, but I'm not available to help with transportation. You'll need to figure out another solution." "Are you serious right now?" "Sarah, this is my career we're talking about. This job could mean I'll stop needing help from the family. Isn't that what you want?" The manipulation was transparent but still psychologically sophisticated. He was reframing his request as being in my interest, suggesting that helping him now would reduce future requests for assistance. But I'd heard variations of this promise many times before, and it had never resulted in Jake becoming more self-sufficient. "I'm sure you'll figure something out. Rental cars, rideshare services, asking friends for help, there are multiple options besides borrowing my car." "I can't believe you're doing this. Mom was right, you've completely changed. You used to care about your family." The accusation stung, but I recognized it as another manipulation tactic. Equating care with compliance, suggesting that love required sacrificing my own needs for his convenience. "I do care about you, Jake. But caring doesn't mean I have to fix every problem or provide every solution. You're an adult, and this is your responsibility to handle." After hanging up, my hands were trembling slightly from the adrenaline and emotional toll of refusing a family request. But I also felt something new. Pride in my ability to recognize manipulation and respond with clarity rather than guilt-driven compliance. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with reinforcements. Mom calling to discuss Jake's crucial interview. And my inexplicable refusal to help. Dad texting about family loyalty and mutual support during important moments. Even Aunt Miriam weighing in with disappointment about my sudden coldness toward Jake's career opportunities, but I'd crossed a threshold. Each boundary I maintained made the next one easier to recognize and enforce. Each time I chose my own well-being over their comfort, I felt stronger and more confident in my decisions. By evening, the crisis had apparently resolved itself. Jake had found alternative transportation, proof that my help hadn't actually been necessary, just convenient. But instead of acknowledging this reality, my family seemed to view my unavailability as a personal betrayal rather than a reasonable boundary. The most telling message came from Mom: "I hope you're satisfied." Jake had to borrow money from his friend to rent a car because his own sister wouldn't help him. "This is what your selfishness looks like in practice." I read the message twice, marveling at the twisted logic. Jake's lack of planning had required him to find alternative solutions, like any adult would in his situation. But somehow this normal consequence of poor preparation was reframed as evidence of my character flaws. I screenshot the message and sent it to Angela with a note: "I think I'm finally understanding what you meant about their reactions revealing who they really are." Her response was immediate: "Exactly. People who respect boundaries don't punish you for having them. The angrier they get about your self-protection, the clearer it becomes that the protection was necessary." That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the day's events and feeling a mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. Standing up to family pressure was emotionally draining, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I'd prioritized my own needs and responsibilities without automatically accommodating everyone else's poor planning and emotional volatility. My heart monitor watch, prescribed as part of my cardiac recovery, showed steady, healthy rhythms throughout the day. Even during the stressful conversation with Jake, my heart rate had elevated but returned to normal quickly rather than remaining chronically elevated as it had been before my hospitalization. The physical evidence supported what I was learning. Emotionally, protecting myself from family dysfunction wasn't selfish or cruel. It was medically necessary and psychologically healthy, and despite their threats of abandonment and accusations of betrayal, I was discovering that life without constant family crisis management was actually peaceful and sustainable. The siege would continue, but I was no longer afraid of withstanding it. 2 weeks after Jake's car borrowing incident, the family pressure campaign reached its crescendo with an unexpected ambush that revealed the true depths of their desperation to restore the old dynamics. It was a Tuesday evening, and I'd just returned from my follow-up appointment with Dr. Patel, who'd been pleased with my progress. My blood pressure was stabilizing, my stress-related symptoms were diminishing, and my overall health markers showed significant improvement since implementing the boundary changes. I was settling in with a cup of tea and a book I'd been wanting to read for months when a sharp knock interrupted the peaceful evening. Not the tentative tap of a neighbor or delivery person, but the authoritative pounding of someone who expected immediate attention. My stomach clenched with recognition even before I looked through the peephole and saw Mom standing in the hallway, flanked by Dad and Jake like some kind of intervention squad. "She's cutting us off," Mom corrected. "We're just accepting her decision and moving on without her." The ultimatum was delivered with theatrical pain but underlying calculation. They were betting that the threat of complete family abandonment would terrify me back into compliance. It was the nuclear option in their manipulation arsenal, designed to make me choose between maintaining my boundaries and losing my family entirely. A year ago, even a month ago, the threat would have worked. The fear of being completely alone, of having no family connections at all, would have driven me to apologize and resume my role as the family's financial and emotional caretaker, but lying in that hospital bed, connected to heart monitors and facing the reality of stress-induced cardiac damage, had changed something fundamental in my priorities. I'd realized that having family members who only valued what I provided wasn't the same as having a family that loved me. "I understand," I said quietly. "That's your choice to make." The response clearly wasn't what they'd expected. Mom's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally rage as she realized her ultimate threat had failed to restore my compliance. "You're really going to choose strangers over your own family?" she asked, her voice shaking with either genuine emotion or skilled performance. "I'm choosing my health over dysfunction," I replied. "And if you can't support medical decisions that protect my well-being, then maybe some distance would be good for everyone." They left without another word, but the silence was loaded with unfinished threats and unspoken recriminations. Jake lingered in the doorway for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something conciliatory, but ultimately followed his parents without attempting any bridge building. After they were gone, I sat in my violated apartment feeling a mixture of relief and grief. Relief that the confrontation was over and I'd maintained my boundaries under extreme pressure. Grief for the family relationships I'd finally admitted were built on exploitation rather than love. I called Angela, needing professional perspective on what had just happened. "They brought the whole family to pressure you in your own home?" she asked, and I could hear the professional concern in her voice. It felt like an intervention, except instead of trying to help me recover from something harmful, they were trying to pressure me back into being harmed. That's exactly what it was. When individual manipulation tactics fail, dysfunctional families often escalate to group pressure and ultimatums. The fact that they threaten to cut you off entirely tells you everything you need to know about the conditional nature of their love. Part of me is relieved, I admitted. If they follow through on cutting contact, I won't have to keep setting boundaries and dealing with their anger about it. "And how do you feel about the possibility of having no family relationships?" I considered the question while looking around my peaceful apartment, now restored to its previous tranquility. Scared, but also curious about what my life might look like without constant family crisis management. I've been so focused on maintaining relationships that weren't actually sustainable that I haven't had energy to build healthier connections. That's a very mature perspective. Many people in your situation discover that removing toxic relationships creates space for healthier ones to develop. Over the following days, the silence from my family was complete and profound. No demanding phone calls, no guilt-inducing texts, no emergencies requiring my immediate attention. My phone stayed quiet, and my stress levels dropped noticeably. The heart monitor watch I wore showed consistently normal readings without the spikes that had become routine during family interactions. At work, I found myself more present and energetic. Without the constant background drain of family crisis management, I had more emotional resources available for patient care and collegial relationships. Jennifer noticed the change immediately. "You seem different," she observed during a quiet moment at the nurse's station. "More relaxed, somehow." "My family made good on their threat to cut me off," I explained. "It's been surprisingly peaceful." "How are you handling the isolation?" I thought about the question as I updated patient charts. It's not isolation, exactly. It's freedom from constantly managing other people's poor choices and emotional volatility. I'm discovering that I actually have friends and colleagues who care about my well-being without needing anything in return. The truth was that my family's withdrawal had revealed how much energy I'd been dedicating to relationships that were fundamentally extractive. Without that constant drain, I was beginning to notice and appreciate the healthier connections that had always been present but overshadowed by family dysfunction. My patients' families continued to provide examples of what functional relationships looked like. Mrs. Chen had returned for a follow-up appointment, accompanied again by her daughter, who'd taken additional time off work to ensure her mother's complete recovery. Mr. Davidson's son called regularly to check on his father's diet, compliance and medication schedule. David Martinez's wife had enrolled them both in stress management classes to prevent future cardiac episodes. These families weren't perfect, but they operated from a foundation of mutual care and respect that made my own family dynamics look increasingly dysfunctional by comparison. 2 weeks into the family silence, I received a single text from Jake: "Hope you're happy with your choices. Mom's been really depressed since you decided you don't need us anymore." The message was designed to trigger guilt about Mom's emotional state, but it actually revealed the family's continued inability to accept responsibility for their own behavior. I wasn't making Mom depressed by protecting my health. Mom was making herself depressed by refusing to adapt to reasonable boundaries. I didn't respond to Jake's text, but I did screenshot it and send it to Angela with a note, still trying to make me responsible for managing Mom's emotions. Her response was immediate: "The fact that they're still trying to manipulate you even after cutting contact shows how desperate they are to restore the old dynamic. Your silence is the best response." That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the desert sunset and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine peace. No family emergencies demanding immediate attention, no guilt about unmet obligations, no anxiety about disappointing people who'd never been satisfied anyway. For the first time since childhood, I was free to discover who I was when I wasn't constantly managing other people's crises and absorbing their emotional volatility. The silence from my family no longer felt like punishment. It felt like liberation. 6 months later, I was standing in the same grocery store where this whole journey had begun, reaching for pasta sauce without any chest pain or heart palpitations. The simple act of shopping for dinner had become genuinely peaceful rather than another task weighted down by family obligations and guilt. My cart contained only items I actually wanted, chosen for meals I would enjoy eating, purchased with money that belonged entirely to me. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or cinematic. There were no explosive confrontations or moment of perfect clarity that solved everything at once. Instead, it had been a gradual rebuilding of my life around my own needs and values, like slowly healing from a chronic illness I hadn't realized was affecting every aspect of my existence. Dr. Patel's most recent evaluation had shown remarkable improvement in all my cardiac markers. My blood pressure was consistently normal without medication, my stress tests revealed a strong, healthy heart, and the irregular rhythms that had first brought me to the emergency department had completely resolved. She'd attributed the improvement to successful stress management and lifestyle modifications, but I knew the real cause was simpler: I'd stopped allowing other people's dysfunction to literally damage my heart. "It's rare to see such dramatic improvement in stress-related cardiac issues," she'd told me during my last appointment. "Whatever changes you've made are clearly working. Your heart is functioning like that of someone 10 years younger than when we first met." The changes extended far beyond my physical health. At work, I'd been promoted to charge nurse for the cardiac unit, a position that utilized my clinical skills while allowing me to mentor newer nurses who reminded me of my younger self. I'd started a support group for healthcare workers dealing with family stress, and the response had been overwhelming. Apparently, I wasn't the only person whose family treated their career success as an unlimited resource to be exploited. My social life had expanded to include people who actually enjoyed my company rather than just my problem-solving abilities. Jennifer and I had become genuine friends, meeting for hiking trips and wine tastings that never involved crisis management or financial requests. I'd joined a book club where literary discussions weren't interrupted by family emergencies, and I'd started taking photography classes that fed my creative side without anyone questioning whether the time and money could be better spent on family obligations. The apartment I'd thought was small and limiting now felt spacious and peaceful. I'd redecorated with colors I actually liked, replacing the neutral tones I'd chosen because they were practical and wouldn't offend anyone. My bookshelves were filled with novels I'd read for pleasure rather than self-help books about managing difficult people. The kitchen contained cooking equipment I'd bought for myself rather than appliances I'd inherited from family members who'd replaced them with newer models. Most surprisingly, I'd started dating someone who treated my career as impressive rather than exploitable. Marcus was a teacher who understood professional demands and respected boundaries, who offered support during stressful periods without creating additional stress himself. Our relationship was built on mutual interest and compatibility rather than my usefulness in solving his problems or managing his emotions. "You seem like someone who's comfortable with herself," he'd observed during one of our early conversations. "It's refreshing to meet someone who doesn't seem to be performing happiness or trying to prove something." The comment had startled me, because I'd spent so many years performing family harmony and proving my worth through usefulness that I'd forgotten what authentic contentment felt like. But he was right. I was comfortable with myself in a way that had been impossible when my entire identity was built around other people's approval and demands. The family silence had maintained itself with remarkable consistency. No birthday calls, no holiday guilt trips, no emergency requests for money or crisis management. Initially, I'd expected them to eventually reach out with apologies or attempts at reconciliation, but as months passed, it became clear that they'd genuinely written me off rather than examining their own behavior. The only communication had come through social media, where I occasionally glimpsed updates that revealed how their lives were progressing without my constant intervention. Jake had apparently lost the Flagstaff job after a few months and moved back in with our parents. Dad's various business ventures continued to cycle through failure and disappointment. Mom's health complaints had escalated to include mysterious ailments that seemed designed to generate sympathy from friends and extended family members, but without me as their primary source of financial support and emotional regulation, they'd been forced to develop other resources and coping strategies. Jake had eventually found steady employment at a local warehouse. Dad had started working part-time at a hardware store to supplement his inconsistent business income. Mom had joined a church group that provided the social attention she craved without requiring the kind of crisis management I'd previously supplied. The most telling update had come from a mutual friend who mentioned seeing the family at a community event. They seemed to be doing fine, she'd reported. Jake was talking about saving for his own apartment, and your parents were discussing vacation plans. They asked how you were doing, but in a way that seemed more curious than concerned. The information confirmed what I'd suspected: my constant support hadn't actually been necessary for their survival. It had been convenient, allowing them to avoid developing independence and resilience, but they were perfectly capable of managing their lives without exploiting mine. Angela and I had eventually transitioned from crisis counseling to maintenance therapy, meeting monthly to process the ongoing changes in my life and relationships. She'd helped me recognize patterns that might lead back to dysfunction and develop strategies for maintaining healthy boundaries in new relationships. The biggest risk for people in your situation is recreating similar dynamics with different people, she'd explained. When you're used to being valued primarily for what you provide, it can feel natural to attract other people who want to exploit your caretaking tendencies. Her warning had proven prescient when I'd briefly dated someone who'd seemed charming and successful until he'd started asking for small favors that gradually escalated in scope and frequency. But my experience with family dysfunction had taught me to recognize the early warning signs, and I'd ended that relationship before it could develop into a pattern of exploitation. The contrast with Marcus was stark and revealing. He contributed equally to our relationship without keeping score, offered support during difficult periods without expecting anything in return, and respected my decisions without trying to guilt or manipulate me into different choices. Most importantly, he seemed to genuinely enjoy my company even when I wasn't solving his problems or managing his emotions. "I like that you have your own life," he told me when we discussed moving in together. "You don't seem to need me to complete you or validate your worth. That makes our relationship feel like a choice rather than a dependency." The observation highlighted how much my relationship patterns had changed. Instead of attracting people who wanted to be taken care of, I was now drawing partners who valued independence and mutual support. Instead of defining love as sacrifice and service, I was learning to recognize genuine affection and respect. My nursing career had also evolved in unexpected directions. The stress management skills I'd developed through my own recovery had made me particularly effective at helping patients navigate the emotional challenges of serious illness. I'd started specializing in cardiac rehabilitation, helping other people whose hearts had been damaged by chronic stress learn to protect their health through lifestyle changes. "You have a gift for helping people recognize when their relationships are affecting their health," one of my patients had observed. "It's like you understand from personal experience how family stress can literally damage your heart." The work felt meaningful in a way that went beyond professional satisfaction. I was using my own painful experience to help others avoid similar damage, turning my family's dysfunction into a tool for healing other people's lives. On this particular grocery shopping trip, 6 months after my family's ultimatum, I found myself genuinely grateful for the peace and autonomy I discovered on the other side of their rejection. My cart was full of ingredients for a dinner Marcus and I were cooking together, including items we'd chosen because they sounded interesting rather than because they were practical or budget-conscious. As I stood in the checkout line, my phone remained blissfully quiet. No emergency calls demanding immediate attention, no guilt-inducing texts about family obligations, no voicemails explaining why my boundaries were unreasonable or selfish. Just the ordinary sounds of other shoppers going about their own lives, managing their own responsibilities without requiring external crisis management. The cashier, a young woman who reminded me of my former self, looked exhausted as she scanned my items. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications that made her increasingly agitated. "Family drama?" I asked gently. She nodded with tired recognition. My mom thinks I should be available 24/7 to deal with my brother's problems. He's 32 and keeps getting fired from jobs, but somehow it's my responsibility to fix his life. You know, I said carefully. It's possible to love your family without managing their crises. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people handle their own problems. She looked up with surprise and something that might have been hope. Really? Because I feel guilty every time I don't drop everything to help. Guilt is often a sign that you're doing something right, I replied. Healthy people don't try to make you feel guilty for having boundaries. As I left the store, I reflected on how different my life had become since I'd stopped accepting guilt as a valid reason for sacrificing my well-being. The cashier's situation had reminded me of my own journey, but without the painful recognition that had once accompanied such comparisons. I was no longer the person who absorbed other people's dysfunction or mistook exploitation for love. I'd learned to recognize genuine care and respect, to build relationships based on mutual support rather than one-sided service, and to prioritize my own health without feeling selfish or ungrateful. The sunset that evening painted the desert mountains in shades of gold and purple that I'd never noticed during my years of chronic stress and family crisis management. Marcus and I cooked dinner together while jazz played softly in the background, discussing our respective days without any undercurrent of obligation or resentment. You seem happy, he observed as we sat down to eat the meal we'd prepared together. I am happy, I replied, and realized with surprise that it was completely true. For the first time in my adult life, I was living according to my own values and priorities, surrounded by people who valued my well-being as much as I was learning to value theirs. My heart was strong and healthy, both literally and metaphorically, protected by boundaries that I no longer felt guilty about maintaining. The family who'd once defined my entire world had become a distant memory, like recovering from an illness that had once seemed impossible to overcome. And in the peaceful life I'd built from the ashes of their ultimatum, I discovered that being truly loved was nothing like what I'd previously accepted as normal. The silence they'd imposed as punishment had become the foundation of my healing. And I was finally free to discover who I was when I wasn't constantly rescuing people who'd never actually needed saving. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.